Good afternoon. It's my honor to welcome you all to the Fincafé on the Belgian Council Presidency. Thanks to our three distinguished panelists, we are gathered here today for a very inspiring debate. I'm delighted to announce that Chris Meldermans, Head of European Affairs at KBC Group, but also our Chair of the Fabelfin European Affairs Committee, will be here to moderate the discussions and make sure that we will have a very thoughtful exchange of views. First, our CEO, Karel Baert, will set the scene and outline us some principles of European policymaking. It will give us a very inspiring backdrop to start the discussions of today. To all members following the session online, I would like to encourage you to participate actively and share your questions in the chat. We will bundle all these questions for the Q&A session that will follow the debate. And at last, I would like that this debate will inspire you and foster your understanding of EU policymaking, and I hope it will give you also some good insights of the Belgian Council Presidency starting from the 1st of January 2024. Thank you for your participation.
Mr. Baert, the financial industry is confronted with several challenges at the same time. What are the most critical ones?
Well, as you know, financial institutions build their business on trust and resilience. This means that financial stability is really key for the industry, and I strongly believe that our role of main financier of the economy is a responsibility we cannot take lightly. It is crucial that we keep banks well capitalized and resilient. Also, the financial industry plays a key role in the transition towards a more sustainable economy. Belgian financial institutions are committed to be an ambitious partner on sustainability, not only by contributing from the sidelines, but also as a leading force in guiding businesses and consumers in the process of financing the transition.
This is also the era of digitalization and new technologies. What are the key actions that the sector is focusing on?
In order to adapt to the world around us, we invest in digitalization and innovation. Belgian banks are at the forefront in innovation without leaving anybody behind. Together, we should strive to give every citizen the knowledge and tools to manage their finances in all confidence, both whether it's online or offline. Digital skills and financial literacy are crucial and essential factors that we aim to reinforce.
Today we are talking about EU policy making. Do you have the impression that European policymakers are having enough attention for the strategic role of the industry?
Well, I think it's a good question. In my opinion, policy making in general lacks sometimes a long-term vision for the financial industry. Many decisions are still made without a full understanding of knowing the effects for all types of financial institutions, and this often goes hand in hand with an incomplete knowledge of what financial institutions really do. Of course, this is a shared responsibility, informing more people on what we do as a sector and getting policymakers around the table with stakeholders. That should be the common goal. We need more cooperation between policymakers and the private sector.
Now, in recent years, European legislation has become more and more important. How big is the impact of new directives and rules on the industry?
From our perspective, the attention to the EU legislation has grown immensely over the last couple of years. Our members include a wide range of financial institutions such as banks, credit providers, payment service providers, asset managers, brokerage firms, leasing companies, and many other types of entities. It's clear that different institutions are affected in distinct ways, each facing their different challenges. We value and aim to preserve this diversity in the Belgian banking sector, and we believe that policy should also make proportionality a priority too.
Belgium will hold the presidency of the EU Council in 2024 in the first semester. Now, what are the priorities that you expect from the presidency?
First and foremost, I think it's important to have a political field that is supporting to its financial industry. We are proud to represent highly innovative and competitive financial institutions. The Belgian industry is a frontrunner in Europe in several areas, and we adapt every day to the changing context and customer behaviors. Often, our existing solutions can be seen as best practices and should be promoted also in this way at European level by our national policymakers. Secondly, to become more influential at the European level, more timely and well-informed position building is more often needed at the Belgian level. This is mainly in the hands of the policymakers, but we can support them with the needed information. It would be positive to have all stakeholders involved in this process from an early stage. The broad involvement of expert stakeholders would allow policymakers to take a well-informed position and to provide a strong Belgian voice at the European level. Thirdly, our aim should be to ensure a level playing field in Europe. By doing so, competition can play more freely within the European market and provide consumers more transparency on the level of protection they receive. Last but not least, the presidency should offer an opportunity to review how we value the presence of financial institutions in our country. According to the Global Financial Center Index, Brussels has faced a significant decline in importance on the global financial level. Nonetheless, Belgium has several elements that make it an attractive place for investment and growth, such as our innovative industry, our excellent universities, our ideal location, etc. This presidency offers the opportunity for policymakers to leverage our strengths to the fullest.
Karl Baert, thank you very much.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, at first a very warm welcome to the Fincafé on the Belgian Council presidency. Please note that the current exchange of ideas is under Chatham House rules. Now give me the opportunity to introduce my distinguished panel guests, starting with Gert-Jan van Gastel, Financial Attaché at the Permanent Representation of Belgium at the EU, Tommy de Temmerman, Member of the Cabinet of Commissioner Mairead McGuinness, I hope I pronounced that well, and Luc Rochtus, Policy Advisor, ECR at the European Parliament. Gentlemen, a very warm welcome, and as said, we would like to exchange some ideas with you on the upcoming presidency of Belgium at Europe. And maybe I'll start with you, Gert-Jan, because you were in the middle between Belgium and Europe at the permanent representation of the EU. So I just want to find out, so how are you preparing yourself for this task? And how is the Perm Rep preparing for this presidency?
Thank you, Chris. And let me just first start by thanking you. It's a pleasure to be here and discuss some interesting topics on EU policy making and the Belgian presidency, and also with the colleagues Tommy and Luc will be, of course, shedding some interesting lights from their perspective. Now, on the preparations for the presidency, I mean, we're less than 2 months away, as everybody knows. So I guess we are all getting slightly nervous. But on the other hand, I think we are well prepared as we can be. And maybe to give you an idea, in the Perm Rep, we already started preparatory discussions almost 2 years ago, actually. So it's an immense time frame where we took our time to prepare. But I can tell you there's also a lot of work that goes into this. We have to prepare for all kinds of events and meetings. As probably most of you know, also our Minister of Finance will organize an informal ECOFIN Council in Ghent, and of course that requires caterers and press and all kind of teams that need to prepare. And then, of course, also for us, the attachés, we need to prepare for all the formal agendas, the meetings of the ambassador at COREPER level, the formal council meetings. So we really needed that 2 years of time to prepare. And I think the Perm Rep, as I said, is as prepared as we can be. We grew, we almost doubled in size from about 120 people last year to over 250 today. And we stand ready, I would say, to deal with all of the challenges that come our way. But I think it's a fact that there's also quite a lot of uncertainty at the moment, geopolitical turmoil, conflicts around the world. And especially, I would say, for our ambassador, the head of the Perm Rep, these prove to be challenging times, but I think we are well prepared. And then for myself, I mean, I will be dealing also maybe with some uncertainty, but on a micro level, it's that we don't know what the current Spanish presidency will do, how much of the files they can conclude. And so we had to prepare, or I had to prepare for the worst. Maybe expecting that almost none of the files can be concluded. I think that's the baseline scenario for which we are prepared. And that meant that, of course, we had to find people in the different Belgian administrations that will help me, experts from all the administrations. For my kind of files, financial services files, this is mainly National Bank of Belgium, but also in the ministries and the FSMA, there is people standing ready, I would say, to help us. Limited teams, small teams, but I think efficient teams that are ready to deal with the challenges ahead, and to also deal with all these files in a very, very short time frame that we have. And I think it's something that we probably will debate today. It's a special situation. We have the European elections in June. So I think everything is very concentrated, especially in the first half of our presidency, January, February, March. There will be a lot of work, but we're well prepared.
It looks really impressive. So it looks for us as the industry that we still have a lot of files to deal with in the coming months as well. But I was actually also looking at Luc and just looked for our information now. From a parliamentary view, is this bringing a change for you as a member of parliament or an attaché to the members of parliament, European Parliament, that Belgium is the council president is? Does it change the way we can weigh on decisions, the way we are looked at by different member states?
Well, first of all, also thank you for having me here. It's quite an honor to be in this panel together with my distinguished co-panelists. Let me perhaps first agree with Geert-Jan. I mean, it's not just a presidency, it's a special presidency. It's the final presidency during the current parliamentary mandate. And of course, it's especially special for us as well, as we are all Belgians here around the table. Let me say, for the parliament, it kind of increases a bit the pressure, because the fact that we are nearing the end of the mandate, it's normal that, let's say, in the second half of a mandate, you know, Parliament is working at full speed. But perhaps in the current mandate, given that in the beginning we had COVID as well, I mean, for quite substantial time during the current mandate, it's in the fact that also in the first half the Commission is mostly preparing the proposal, and things usually get busier in the Parliament in the second half. And now that dynamics is even bigger. So it's even more pressure in the Parliament as well to finalize files indeed ahead of the elections. At the same time, of course, good deals remain more important than quick deals. So it remains a bit to be seen indeed what the Spanish presidency will be able to finish and what will indeed be handled under the Belgian presidency. But I can say indeed that we are very much looking forward to it. There's quite a number of files on our table, but I guess we will get into that later. And of course, it's special because it only happens once every 13 years.
13
that
years,
is Belgium, that you know the member state that you know best, as we tend to say in the EU, has the presidency. So indeed, that's very special.
Okay. When does the Parliament stop its activities before the election? Is it end of March?
Well, end of March, April, but in fact, when it comes to concluding deals, you could say it's even earlier, because it takes some time, you know, also to finalize texts that yet have to be voted. So the actual cut-off date on quite a number of files in terms of trilogue agreements could be already as early as February.
Oh, as early as February.
End of February. So basically, the Belgian presidency will have to go full speed when it comes to, you know, concluding trilogue agreements in the first third of its actually mandate of 6 months.
So it's actually a really short presidency we're having ahead of us.
There's other things.
Well, with regard to closure files, of course. Yes. But tell me on that one, you're in the Commission, so you're actually like the neutral person at the table. How do you look at us as Belgium as being the next presidency? And secondly, can you give us some insights on the current files, where they stand, and how which files would you like to be handled by Belgium? So give you some insights from the side of the Commission.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, from my side as well, thank you very much for having me. I think I would agree with my two colleagues. It's a very special presidency because you're coming at the very end of the legislative cycle. I mean, Luc said there's not much time for the Parliament to work on the final agreements that we might reach. So for us as Commission, and at this stage, the focus is on getting as much done as possible. I mean, we have this role that we come first in the legislative process, so we're usually very busy making proposals towards the beginning of a mandate. I think here in terms of making and adopting proposals in financial services, we delivered on the work program that we had. If you look at the mission letter of my commissioner and all the priorities that we had, all these files are adopted, proposed. Now, it doesn't mean that they're finished. Mm-hmm. So we need to get things done. I mean, Geert-Jan said we're still have a bit more than a month of Spanish presidency to get a very good view of what the priorities will be for the Belgian presidency. We'll need to see what we can still do there. But yeah, you have a number of files that are very advanced, where the Council and the Parliaments are already discussing, and we hope that the Spanish colleagues can still close a number of them. And in function of that, the focus of the Belgian presidency at the beginning on closing, to reach this deadline of end of February, maybe, if you take into account legal checks, translations, and all these things. So for us, we made these proposals. Now we also participate in those negotiations after. Mostly we're trying to facilitate agreements, and we're bringing technical advice and technical support to the two co-legislators with the aim of closing as much as possible.
And apart from closing as much as possible, which we fairly understand, of course, but next to that, if you look at the wish list of the Commissioner, Mrs. McGuinness, what would be the priority file she wants to see closed before her mandate comes to an end?
I'm afraid it's as much as possible, so most of them. So that's the challenge. I think really determining priorities will come a little bit later, maybe when we reach mid-January, end of January, and we actually see where we are. I mean, at this stage, I think, also depending on the interplay between the two presidencies, there's still, I mean, we're still in a very good place to get a lot of these things done. I think you see also in terms of timing, there's a number of proposals that came quite early in the mandate from the Commission that are still on the table. Thinking about regulation to fight money laundering, for instance, or changes to insurance regulation. These files have been on the table for some time, so that obviously we're hopefully close to the end. And then there's a number of things that we proposed also last year, I think, where we have the time needed to reach those agreements. Okay.
Luc, do you have a wish list?
I was thinking about the same file. I mean, indeed, as much as possible, but it also needs to be realistic, because in the Parliament, coordinators of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee have discussed this. Also, kind of, they had to prioritize, again, given that, of course, there's also other parliamentary committees, and there's, going to be there's a small pipeline at some point, a bottleneck if you want to have files finished at plenary level. And from the econ side, I would say indeed, as Tommy already mentioned, the AML files, so anti-money laundering, but also the insurance, so solvency and the insurance recovery and resolution directive. Then there's some smaller files perhaps that listing act can maybe even be closed on the Spanish presidency if it goes well. Should not be too difficult. There's of course also the clearing package, so EMIR, but other priorities that the econ coordinators have identified are the bank crisis management, so the CMDI package, and also the economic governance package. I'm very skeptical as to those two packages, that these will be finished in the current mandate.
And what's the bottleneck on the anti-money laundering file?
No, the bottleneck, it's mostly literally finding, having the space in the procedure.
Both of you can answer.
AML, I guess.
I think it's a huge file. Let's say that's the first thing. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of lines. So I mean, it's a massive file. And then of course there is also the fact that there is the new AML authority that will be designed and has to be established. And for that we need also a decision on where it will be located. We can say, okay, the content can be separated from this decision, but I mean there is an interaction between the two, and this is also creating some kind of, or will potentially create some kind of bottleneck in the weeks and months to come. But at least if the Spanish cannot conclude on the content of the AML package, and I'm really talking about content here, then we stand ready, of course. As Tommy said, this is a file that's open for, I think, over 2 years, 2.5 years maybe. So this needs to be concluded, and it's also on our list to conclude everything which is already open in these kind of trialogue negotiations between Parliament, Commission, and the Council. The insurance files, we will focus on them to close it. Luc mentioned the Listing Act and EMIR. Again, I mean, these kind of files, they are open for quite a while, and it would be a shame if we cannot show to the outside world that we cannot conclude on them. Of course, then, I mean, there is the ongoing discussions in the Council on a number of initiatives. I think Luc mentioned CMDI, the Crisis Management and Deposit Insurance. I think here the intentions of the Belgian presidency are to go for a general approach within the Council. And I think if we look at the sensitivities of the file, it touches on some national interests and the use of the National Deposit Insurance Scheme. I mean, this is not an easy file, highly politically sensitive, but it's also part of the banking union, which everyone, I think, agrees needs to move forward. So again, this is a high ambition that we have to at least come to an agreement within the Council, and then it will be up to the next presidencies to negotiate with the Parliament. There is the PSD, the Payment Services Directive. It's also quite high on our agenda to aim for a general approach within the Council. The same for the Retail Investment Package, which is maybe more sensitive for the industry. And then there are a number of files where we will have to see how far we can go. I mean, again, the focus will be on the trialogues in the first few months. We pick up with the rest of the world of the work in the Council, I would say, from March onwards. So we cannot do everything, and potentially files like Digital Euro, which is, as everybody knows, also politically sensitive. We will have to see how far we can get. But I think CMDI, Retail Investment Strategy, PSD, these are files where a deal within the Council seems within reach. So we will for sure pursue it, and I think that also will make the Commission quite happy that at least these big initiatives that she put forward and are being taken up and taken seriously, and are not put in the fridge, because that would be a shame indeed.
Of course, between dream and reality, there are a lot of practical barriers in between, which are not always taken forward at the level of the Commission. But look, please go on.
I just wanted to say, I mean, it's the same holds for the Parliament. For some files that Geert-Jan has mentioned, for PSD, I would say the broader payments package, and also including open finance, of which I'm personally very involved. I also wanted to mention the financial data access proposal, but also the single currency package and the retail investment package. I mean, if Parliament can manage to have a negotiating mandate before the elections, it will already be a lot.
And can I ask you, Tommy, then, because you say if Parliament can reach an agreement before the elections.
I mean, a mandate to negotiate
further.
For the next Parliament and to pick up.
Then how does it go further? Because then you have 3 other presidencies, with Hungary to start, if I'm not mistaken. You will end up with a new Commission. Is it as such a given that the agreements you have reached before the elections are taken forward by the other presidencies and the new Commission?
It's not a given. Also, there are different procedures, but if you only vote, let's say, at committee level, you don't vote at plenary, it's theoretically a bit more tricky, but in practice, I mean, this is the 3rd term I'm actually working in the Parliament. I've been working in the Parliament since 2009. In practice, the files are being picked up.
Okay.
So if you manage to, let's say, have a Parliament negotiating mandate on, for example, financial data access, it's very likely that the next Parliament will pick it up, even though some members might not be re-elected. Exactly. The same happened. I mean, Ms. Van Overtveld became a co-rapporteur on CCP recovery and resolution at the beginning of the current mandate, and that file already dated from the previous one. So they pick it up and they go to the table and negotiate with the Council.
But it does create, again, some delay in the process. So I think from our point of view, we will try again to push as much files through, use that 1.5 to 2 months that we have to really conclude, because although there is maybe in practice little risk that files are being reopened, there is theoretically a risk, and I think there are a number of files, maybe for example EMIR, where the new Parliament might think differently from the current one. So again, I think it's good that we conclude most files now and don't leave too much open. But again, as you said, Chris, reality might show that we don't have sufficient time.
Might come in between, yeah, for sure. Tom, is that your experience as well? Because I suppose that the cabinet, the next commissioner, whoever this is going to be, do they want to have their own way of looking forward to everything, or are they just go on a stable basis, continue with what has been taken forward before them, and just continue on that?
I think usually you have a combination of the two. I think you will have a new leadership in the Commission. You will have political guidelines, so that will determine the direction of travel for the next 5 years. No, I think even if these files they have important political implications, they're also very technical files, and financial stability is a sort of public good that I think more or less everyone can agree on, regardless of the Commission goes a bit more center-right or center-left. These type of things, except for some questions that should be rather uncontroversial. So I'm expecting that if there are files where we don't go to the very end, but we have positions from the Council, positions from the Parliament, that this will help us for the next mandate. And then you will have big political initiatives, new things that will come from the program that will be debated in the elections, but there will also be a certain level of continuity, because I think financial stability is pretty consensual.
Yeah. Talking about files taking forward, Gert-Jan, I just received a question. I think it's rather important to what extent will Belgium give importance to taxation-related files like FASTER? I'm not going to mention the FTT, so we'll just keep it to FASTER.
Well, I think that's also a file that's high on our agenda, the tax files. There are many other initiatives. It's actually not my file, so I'm only dealing with the financial services files. But I can tell you also in the taxation there are quite a number of priorities. I would say it's taxation, it's financial services, and then, as I think the colleagues mentioned, the economic governance review, which will be taking most of our time. But yeah.
Okay, so it's not off the agenda for sure.
No.
I see you nodding as well.
Parliament is only consulted on taxation files, but that said, there are some interlinkages. I mean, the DEBRA proposal is kind of in between taxation and financial services. So,
but also here, I think, it's not my world, but I mean, I think we will do our best again. It's my understanding, maybe Tommy knows more, but that these kind of files are also, they also need unanimity, if I'm not mistaken, or most of them. So that's also not very helpful if you want to find deals in a short time frame. But I know from the colleagues that this one is indeed high on our wish list to take forward.
I think for us it's important because it's been almost 10 years that we try to have this consistent plan to develop capital markets in Europe. So there's a number of things that you can do in financial services regulation, but it's broader than that. If you want to have the development and also break down the barriers to more integration, we have to look at taxation. I think this file that you mentioned on withholding tax, I think in practice it's quite a step forward. It's quite annoying today if you're investing in shares in one country and you're based in another country that you have to fill all sorts of documents to recuperate part of your taxes. So I think for us it's really part of the financial agenda, even if it's taxation. Same thing for the file that we have on reforming insolvency proceedings. If you want to invest in another country, you want to know what will happen if things go wrong. If we have a minimum level of harmonization that will help investment in the single market, I think.
I think it's very interesting what you're saying, but that's most. If you want to invest into a company, let's say in the Czech Republic, so it's just mentioning something. Don't distinct anything out of that. But that's when you're talking about insolvency procedures. That's in the worst case scenario, and it's good to note it in advance. But something you don't have access to is access to the balance sheet of those companies in those different countries. If you go to Belgium, you can look at the Kruispuntbank voor Ondernemingen and you can check the balance sheet. But you don't have that on a European level. I would think that would be very helpful as an investor, because I would like to know in advance what's the balance sheet of that company. I've never seen that in any of the papers of CMU. Now, I mean, we should not be lobbying around this table, but if we're talking about the CMU, I think there are a lot of topics we can certainly look up in order to go for more cross-border participation. I'm talking particularly also about retail participation in the market. It's
So I think, but we started working on that. So the information available. So there's a proposal that we just completed now, which we called ESAP, so European Single Access Points, where we're trying to gather information that is relevant for economic and financial decision making at European level, easily accessible. Not too costly either, so it's actually available. So I think we need to build on that. Of course, when we develop that proposals, we also have to try to reach a balance between pooling the information that we have available, making it accessible, but not requiring too much additional reporting. So I think we're open to see how that works, and in the next mandates, if there are ideas to build on that, I mean, sure. Just keeping in mind that we're also at a moment where we're trying to minimize or even actually reduce reporting requirement on companies, financial or not.
I have a more general question out of the files. Is if you, and for all three of you, if we just look at Belgium as a country, so how important is this for our country to be the president of the council?
It's definitely important. It's a special situation only by the fact that there is 13, 14 years between each presidency that you can do. But I mean, we explained it already a few times. We have a very short window in closing everything. I think everybody is really counting on Belgium, who has a lot of experience. We are in the center of Europe. We understand how Europe works. So it's very important for us to show that indeed we are fulfilling that reputation, I would say, that we have as bridge makers in closing gaps between member states. If the Spanish don't succeed in closing their files, it's because there are some important issues left. There are important divergent views around the table, and I think Belgium is keen to show that we can close these gaps, and for that reason alone, I think it's important to show what we can do.
I think it might, this system where you change presidencies every 6 months, it might look a bit weird from the outside. Yes. And before I was working for the institution, I also thought, it's a very short time. I think from the inside, what I see is that you have a huge investment from a country and its administration for a 6-month period. I mean, Gert-Jan mentioned there's a lot of colleagues from the National Bank, the FSMA, the ministry, that will get more involved in European affairs. And that's also an experience that they will carry with them after. And the other way around, you'll have a lot of European events happening here in Belgium, like the informal ECOFIN Council in Ghent. So I think it brings the country and the administration closer to Europe and the other way around. So I think actually from the inside, it's a pretty good system.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand this rotating presidency. It creates some. But a question I receive quite often is as well, and I look for is that to what extent can a small country like Belgium be vital in this whole process of Europe?
Well, I think also Gert-Jan already mentioned it. We have a very good. Belgium has a very good reputation as a bridge maker. Has an excellent reputation, I think, in EU policy circles, and I see a lot of reasons for that. I mean, also we should not forget that Belgium is a founding EU member state, which has still has quite some advantages, but also I think, given the complexity of our own, let's say, political system that is multi-layered, also that makes Belgian politicians quite skillful in navigating complex political environments. That is, of course, also the case in Europe, so that's also very much an advantage. But then I would say also another advantage that I guess, it's maybe a bit more of a cliche, but that I think that also Belgians have is we are, let's say, at the boundaries, both culturally and linguistically, between the Latin and the Germanic countries. And I also think this gives us a specific advantage in our communication style. I think we tend to be, polite and diplomatic, but at the same time also efficient and effective. Mm-hmm. And the reason is literally because we are in the middle of these two cultural spheres. So all these different advantages that I have just mentioned give us a very good position to indeed to strike compromises. And another fact, but then specifically for the European Parliament, is also that Belgium tends to send very senior politicians to the European Parliament, which is not always. I mean, for some other member states, you are being promoted if you move from the European Parliament to the national parliament. In Belgium, it's often perceived as it's the other way around. So I think in all that together makes us very good bridge makers, as I get.
Yeah, makes us deal makers as well.
Also, yeah.
Yeah, because the question, I mean, small member state, can we weigh in on as a small member state, seem to be indicating that it's difficult. But I also look at it in a very positive way. I think we're probably playing way above our small size, and that countries that are bigger than us actually still envy us in what we can do. And I agree with Luc. We're not only geographically at the center, but also in values. We are in the center of Europe. And the fact that we are everywhere since the beginning in Europe, but also on the international level. If we look at banking legislation, we are also in the BIS, in the Basel Committee. I mean, this helps us enormously because we have way more information than some other member states. And I think we are doing an excellent job. On the other hand, let's be realistic. There's also the tandem Germany-France, of course, that will always stay like that. But I do want to emphasize here that I do think we have quite a positive story going on, and that Belgium is certainly playing and weighing in on the discussions. And I think also the Commission feels that every day, that although we are small, we do have something to say, and we are being listened to. And
Belgium is not that small if you look at the 27 member states. So I think there is influence. I think it's certainly perceived very positively within the institutions, the role that Belgium plays. Not only the influence, but let's say the role of compromise maker. That's maybe an advantage of being a medium-sized country, where you're big enough to have the resources, but you're not one of the biggest ones, so you can make compromise and you can facilitate a compromise. It's a bit easier, I think, for Belgium than it might be for others. Yeah.
Does this mean that, and now for the FableFin members, is that when we, in a very early stage, try to get in contact with you with regard to questions and concerns we have, that apart from the fact that I do know that you take it forward, I mean, I don't have no doubts around that, but it all will be taken into account by the others, the other member states, or, yeah, so how valuable is the input from FableFin or Assuralia or any other associations with regarding to the current and the ongoing files?
Happy to start, but there's a lot of things that can be said as an answer to this question. First of all, maybe don't underestimate the amount of emails we get every day. I mean, that's really that's one thing. So, but of course, speaking about associations, it's often easier because if you speak with associations, they have internally already discussed on positions. And if you have to speak, directly with every single financial institution, I mean, honestly, if you would take every meeting request, you don't have time to do your job anymore. So you need to be selective. Of course, it's very helpful to get input, ideally, indeed, at an early stage. That's very because also quite often, I mean, input comes too late. I mean, but that's another discussion. But also, I would say, ideally, you build, let's say, kind of relationships of trust and longer-lasting relations that you maintain over time, and not only reach out, when you need a particular thing, and then you don't hear from them anymore. So again, there's a whole lot. Maybe now Jan can say so, because we can talk about this for a very long time if you want.
I think the question was, is your input heard? I think EU lobbying, if you want, is very different from the US, where it's about throwing money to policymakers. Here in the EU, I think it's really expertise-based. So if you make your points clear to whatever policymaker, I think it's being picked up. Of course, you need to be concise, and I agree with Luc. I mean, we can't. If it's too long, I mean, it gets lost into the sheer amount of emails and meetings that we have to do. I also agree with Luc. I think an advice that I can give is be as early as possible. And I think in two things. First, you need to reach out to the Commission, I would say, way before a proposal is tabled. If it's at the level of the Director General or in the inter-services consultation. I mean, Tommy can correct me, but my feeling is it's already more or less set in stone. So you need to know way before what the Commission is doing. These kind of ideas are already shaped at the European Council, actually, and then they are being discussed with think tanks and academic researchers. So you do know more or less what the Commission will be working on. They have their strategic priorities. And if you engage, you can pick up and try to find out what can be potentially challenging things in the proposal for the financial industry. And then, of course, you can explain in a technical but short and a comprehensive way why this creates issues. And then, of course, if the proposal comes out and there are still issues on the table, I think here again, the timing is crucial. I mean, from the outside world, it might seem that we have very long discussions on files. Banking package took us 2.5 years, 2 years, 2 years and a half. I think there are files that take even way more time. But the priorities are set in the very first few weeks. Mm-hmm. And so I know, and I think it's very valuable that also FableFin, for example, works a lot with the European associations, and I think it's good. They have a clear view. They can work very fast on the general picture. But problems from the Belgian side, what is important for the Belgian industry, this is something which often comes at a later stage. and at a later stage often is too late. It's really, I mean, Belgian positions are being made in the first few weeks when the Commission comes out, and it's very difficult actually. I mean, every presidency, we try to explain, every presidency tries to aim for a general approach on a file. If you come after a few months, half a year, like, look, we forgot this is an issue for our country, which is important, they might be careful because it might breach the agreements that they already found. So I think timing for me is indeed of essence.
I mean, I totally agree. And I mean, it's even institutionalized to a certain extent from the Commission side. That's before we make proposals, we always have public consultations. Yeah. That we explain what the intention is, what the problem is, what is it that we're trying to solve. And you can contribute. Usually we organize meetings, conferences, but you can also submit contributions in writing, and I know you do also via the European associations. So that's, I mean, it's very important for us, and we review all these things very carefully because we're looking for the opinions of people who work in the sector on the ground, but we're also mostly we're looking for evidence, facts. So the more you can also have evidence-based argumentation, quantified, it's way easier for us to take that into account and to factor it into what will become a proposal. But yeah, these are usually huge texts, so you really have to come early. Otherwise, with these thousands of pages, the way we're dealing with this in negotiations is we're looking at everything at the beginning, but then we're just narrowing down and narrowing down and narrowing down. And the last months is mostly trying to solve 2 or 3 things that are probably the most complicated. But there's no intention at that stage of reopening something else, because you know that if you really want to reach an agreement within that time frame, what is already agreed has to stay where it is, and you need to focus on the last complicated bits.
Okay. No, it's indeed. I just want to ask another question on Belgium in that respect. Is that, yeah, I suppose that the Prime Minister will give a speech on the priorities of Belgium in the coming weeks, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's planned somewhere around the 8th of December, but yeah. I'm not entirely sure.
I don't want to ask an embarrassing question, by the way, but I suppose the focus will not only be on the financial industry. There will be much. Can you give us slight insight on whether there's going to be a lot of focus on trade or health, or is it too early to ask?
I think it's too early, and I do want to give the scoop to him. I think there are quite clear instructions also there. So I think, I mean, the focus today, from my perspective, I would like to keep it on the financial services, because there's things I can say and there's things I cannot say. But of course, financial services will not be the only topic, given the again the political turmoil, the geopolitical turmoil that we have. There are a lot of conflicts going on, and don't forget that this is also keeping Europe busy. There's also, I mean, this has an impact on inflation also again. So everything is interlinked, but yeah, it's more than purely financial service, that's for sure.
No, but, I suppose we also think there's going to be a lot of attention for trade activities, economic activities, I suppose, as well. But we will take it for some time. I got a question, in fact, which says that, will the presidency have a long-lasting effect on the Belgian administrations? Will it contribute to their understanding of EU policy and increase involvement in the EU policy?
I think Tommy already answered the question.
Tommy wants to ask this question.
I mean, from the Commission side, you see it, because every 6 months you're working with a different presidency, and you see the teams of experts, and then up to the minister that are more involved in the files. And I mean, in terms of resources, I think Gert-Jan mentioned that the staff at the Perm Rep has been doubled. So that gives you an idea. It really increases the exposure that people in national administrations have. And it's 6 months might be short, but they're working a lot, they're not sleeping a lot, so it's a very intense experience ahead of you. And so I think they're taking back really quite a lot. So I think it has a long-lasting effect. You can see people who still remember the previous one quite fondly. So yeah.
And I want to make the link with what you said on having influence on the process. I think our administrations actually, they are already doing quite well in reaching out to the Commission, also in a very early stage. We are of course not far. Brussels is indeed small, but I think this helps. Of course, I mean there is new relationships being made, and these experts, these administrations, they will have a network that they can use and maybe use at a very good time, because now the new priorities will be set. So they can try to influence and understand and have this informal contacts with the Commission, with the Parliament, to shape the ideas of the next years. And I think actually that's also what the industry should be doing. I mean, if I talked about reaching out as soon as possible with the Commission, I think there are some ways of learning, I think, how the administrations are now doing their jobs and how they move this forward in the next coming years.
Being Belgians, in the middle of Brussels and middle of Europe, so to speak, is it always an advantage? Because if I look at the other countries, like Italy, and they gather a lot in their own Italian bubble in Brussels, which something we don't do.
No, exactly. That's, I mean, we from the Parliament side, we sometimes have a bit that feeling when we are in Strasbourg, but actually when it comes to other nationalities in Brussels, let's say in what is called in the EU bubble, you know, they have the children going to the same schools, they have the same hobbies, they meet in the evening, they meet in the weekends, and you actually see that reflected, especially I should say in Econ, and the Italians are a very good example. I mean, I think there's 8 or 9 full members out of 60 in the Econ committee in the European Parliament. They all vote the same, regardless of the political group they belong to, but on I think 90% of the votes on legislative files. So it's a factor to take into account. And there, I guess, you know, indeed, Belgium can, also the industry can learn when it comes to, you know, advocating and, let's say, lobbying policymakers. And I could perhaps give the example here of the Dutch financial sector. They have a monthly event. I mean, it's very informal. I think it's like an after-work event, nothing special, literally a beer and then, of course, the bitterballen, because they remain Dutch. And it's kind of, it's really a monthly thing. It's just, again, very informal, and I think it helps. And also, it's what I meant earlier when I said, you know, invest in longer-lasting relationships, not just ad hoc, oh, we have an issue, please solve it. But, you know, like you enter in a regular dialogue, and then, of course, also, when we see something, we will also perhaps more easily, you know, grasp our mobile phone and give you a call. And it's sometimes as simple as that.
Yeah, it goes two ways, of course. If you have these long-standing, more informal contacts, it goes two ways in a way that you can call us as well, or exactly. To say, can you contribute to, or what's your view on this particular issue, and let's say, for instance, the digital euro, not to mention that one. So that goes both sides, because you cannot have a single dialogue, I mean, a monologue, and rather you have to be two to tango.
I fully agree, and of course, the longer you've been, let's say, in Brussels or in the EU bubble, I mean, some people you've known for years. And of course, you will more easily, if you need some piece of advice, you will more easily contact those. And of course, oh, maybe there's an organization, so or so. And again, I mean, that's also, again, it's building networks at the end of the day, and get to know people. And
I think from the Perm Rep, at least, I mean, I'm probably the only one paid and have an explicit mandate to take all the Belgian interests into account. And I think from the Perm Rep perspective, I really hope that you have the feeling that we are doing this, and that we are consulting also with the industry on what the effects of the legislation can be. But I agree that, I mean, we probably need to work, and maybe the new mandate of the new cycle is the best moment to start working on it. I mean, we can reinforce that Belgian feeling. I think in Brussels there's certainly room for improvement. We have some initiatives at the Perm Rep, Belgians in the Bubble, that do invite the Belgians of the different EU institutions. But I think we need to make that a little bit broader and also involve the administrations, the industry, and I think we can gain. On the other end, I mean, because you asked, is it a disadvantage or an advantage being so close? I think a lot of these member states also have to consult with their capitals. And that takes time, and they clearly have a strong position sometimes. I mean, for us, we are very close, so we can go quite fast, actually. And again, that helps in a matter of sometimes minutes or hours. We come to conclusions which take these kind of big member states sometimes days, because they do have to go back to their member states. So I do think there is an advantage being very close, a big advantage. But we can work a little bit on that team building between Belgians, and I think this initiative is already a good start for that.
Well, thank you. Well, we have thanked Fabelfin for that, of course. Talking about the next commission, and let's hope we can get one in a short period of time. Depending on how the votes are casted. I suppose we don't have to, and look at Tommy, we don't have to expect the new commission to be installed before the end of 2024.
I think it could be at the end of 2024. So if I remember correctly, this commission took office on the 1st of December, I think.
Yeah.
So you have to take into account that the elections are a bit later this time, in June, not in May. But yeah, you could see something, depending on the results, of course. But providing that there's a reasonable path to building coalitions, November, December is certainly not out of reach.
Okay. And coming to that next commission, which we don't know yet who it's going to be, but do we have in Belgium or at the Perm Rep or at the Parliament wish lists for the new commission? What things we would like to see taken forward? As with a lot of things are to be said, also with the deepening or the widening of the European Union, it's going to be with if that happens, it's going to be with a lot of challenges. A lot of people have their own views on that. Do we have something in particular we want to voice to the new commission?
Well, I think we do, but
or is it, no. or if not able to answer that, that's a fair answer as well.
Shall I go first? Because
you can. Yeah.
Okay. So, because from the Parliament perspective, of course, a lot will depend on the composition of the Parliament, how it will look like, and all those things. But when it comes to financial services, a few things I guess we know. I mean, everybody will say the Capital Markets Union is I think, when it comes to financial services, the absolute top priority, as Europe is far still too heavily reliant on bank financing, and especially if you compare with the US and so on. But then maybe if I can, for my own political group, I could think about some other, potential interesting avenues to explore. For example, competitiveness checks. I mean, it was already mentioned also in the introduction by Mr. Baert. I mean, actually, last week I was actually having a coffee with someone and she asked me, does anyone actually looks at the full picture when it comes to the impact on financial institutions in a broad sense, on administrative burden and so on, because often, also in the Parliament, I admit it, you are confronted with a file, you have a rapporteur, shadow rapporteurs, and everybody is, of course, focusing on that particular file, and you want to have it done. And that also means that if you look at the broader picture, everybody is a bit in their own silos. And from that perspective, I think some kind of competitiveness check, also mentioned by Mr. Baert in a strategic long-term vision, this kind of exercise would, I think, be very useful at the beginning of the next mandate. And I can think of some other things as well. Like I think globalization remains very important also for my political group, but I also think for the Parliament and for the Union as a whole. I mean, the whole agenda of open strategic autonomy, but let's hope that it remains open. It's quite important that we can remain keep on defending multilateralism and avoid, let's say, regulatory fragmentation. And I don't have to say it, but of course this is particularly important for Belgium as well. I can easily think of other priorities, but maybe let's leave it here for now.
Would a digital euro be a priority?
Digitalization, yes, but
yes.
the digital euro, not for my political group, not at all.
But is it a political file, the digital euro, or is this?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, it's a very technical file as well, and I think many of the experts in the central banks and together with the ECB are working on it. But then, of course, you also need to sell it to the broader public in a comprehensive way. What is the added value? Why do we need it? There's the link, of course, also with the cash, and in some countries in Europe, it's quite sensitive as well. So this is, I would say, highly politically sensitive. It's also a file that is being discussed regularly, either in ECOFIN or at the Eurogroup level. So, I mean, this is not something you can purely treat on a technical level. If so, I think under the Belgian presidency, we could take this project quite far. But you also have to take into account that political reality, that it is probably not as easy to make it big steps forward. I mean, on the priorities for Belgium, I just wanted to pick up, because let's also be realistic. These kind of priorities, or at least the high-level principles, to my understanding, they are set by the President of the Council, of the European Council, so Charles Michel. He will, of course, consult prime ministers. Probably also here the French-German axe plays an important role. But so don't how to say, we can't really play a big role, I think. I mean, and if there is a role, it will be our prime minister who can give some ideas on a lower level. But again, that's, I'm not sure if it's being picked up. I think maybe a regulatory pause on some aspects is not a bad idea. I know it's been said quite a lot by the Commission, especially at the end of the mandate, but then the new Commission comes in, and of course they have to prove also their added value and why they are there. And then you see quite a lot of initiatives, and I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's good from time to time to clean up, and we also have a lot, and I think Luc will notice a lot of review clauses. Every 3-4 years we have to review all of these files again. Also here, my advice would be, at least if you do a review, it doesn't necessarily has to be followed by a proposal. So the conclusion can also be that everything works fine. But then, yeah, I mean, I've heard the proposals from Luc. I think they are good. On the competitiveness check, I mean, I'll probably also say that we also need to take into account, of course, financial stability, and I think it cannot also be used then to lower some of the standards, which from a personal point of view, I did see in some of the files that we've discussed over the few years. So, I mean, I think certainly there is room for having such checks, and I think the Commission plans to do it. But let's also not misuse it in that perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot has been said. I think on the digital euro, I think I would concur. I mean, it's a very political file. You have to. I mean, it's very complicated technically, but it's really a file where you need a democratic discussion and process, and that's why it might take a bit more time. But you have very important questions on understanding the added value, and the discussion on the features. Very important discussions around privacy, money laundering, but also the interaction with the private financial sector. Bearing in mind that we're discussing now in co-legislation the governing principles, but then it will still be for the ECB to decide at the end, given these features, whether they want to issue it or not. So I think it's very, very political, and behind the technicalities, something that affects citizens. And that's why we had this, at the same time, we made this proposal on the role of cash. I think to be clear, that the digital euro comes to complement cash in a world where we're having a lot more transactions online than before, but there's no intention for cash to go away or to be replaced by a digital euro. So, and we're putting that in law at the same time. On priorities, I think Belgian priorities, I'm waiting to receive. But Commission priorities will depend on the new political guidelines. But you can see different teams, let's say, that are very prominent in the debate for the moment, and that's trickled down in financial services policy as well. I think if you look at the geopolitical context that we mentioned several times, there's a whole debate around economic security in general. I think Luc called it open strategic autonomy. There's a lot of different words for this new concept that maybe the openness and the integration that we had was taken for granted, and we've seen with the war in Ukraine, for instance, that some of these relationships here, mostly on energy, can be weaponized, which is not something we had on the agenda maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So what does it mean for the financial sector and financial services legislation? Competitiveness beyond the checks that we might and we will do in legislation. The fact that you have also in financial services quite a big amount of regulation over the last 10 years post-financial crisis. How does that affect competitivity? But also for non-financial businesses in general, the fact that energy prices tend to remain a bit higher. So there's a general discussion around competitiveness. And I think we mentioned also, and I think it was mentioned in the introduction, digital transition, green transition will continue. How does the sector continue to adapt to that, and how does the regulatory framework frame the direction? I think that will also remain, and financial stability will also stay in the new macro context where we have rates that will continue to be higher. We also need to think of that.
Yeah, we're not going to discuss the Basel files, of course, and the numbers of capital needed for banks, and to what extent that there might be maybe too much needed in order to stay competitive in the market. Coming to, I think I have to draw this. No, not yet. I still have some time. I see that, and I just want to attach to the audience that please don't hesitate to put your questions forward. These gentlemen, I think, are very open to answer all of them. One file which we haven't hardly touched on is open finance. I think it's of importance to the FABLFIN members in particular. So how do you see this progressing, the files on open finance? And please note that maybe we would not agree on all points, but how do you see this going forward? And to what extent do you think it's important to have it, bringing this back to competitiveness? So what are the values of that file for our economy, and for us as consumers?
I happen to be heavily involved in that file, and I'm currently working on the draft report for Mr. Hogeveen, who is an ECR member and a vice chair of the Econ Committee. It's a very complex file. It's really, it's also I've worked on 5. This is the 6th file I'm working on for a rapporteur in the current mandate, and this is by far the most complex one, and the one on which lobbying is very, very fierce. The problem is that I cannot say a lot yet on what we plan to do with it, but of course we welcome the proposal. It's indeed, it's something, it was mentioned before, when it comes to, digitalization and remaining competitive, this is the kind of initiative that is very welcome indeed. That said, whether the Commission proposal as it was published is ready to become law tomorrow, I have some doubts. It needs some heavy amending and streamlining with other files that have recently been adopted. So it's a long way to go, but I think the biggest political question on the file is whether we keep the scope as envisaged by the Commission, which is basically very innovation friendly, which is nice, but the scope is potentially almost everything except what's explicitly excluded. And I see, coming from the industry, the requests are of course to turn around things, to say, yeah, maybe we should start with a list of actual use cases, a bit like what the UK is now doing, and give, of course, UK situation is a bit different because they have the FCA and they just give a mandate and they do things that are not so easily copy-pastable to the EU context. But I think that's the biggest question. I must also say many of the position papers that I receive, and they say, yes, let's start with a few use cases and then let's do a review. But then the use cases are always for somebody else.
Yeah.
That's typical. I mean, that's again, by the way, when we go back to advice for lobbyists, I mean, honestly, it's a bit of a easy solution. So it's very good for the others, but not for me. Not really. I mean, let's see. But I have to discuss. It's of course Mr. Hoogeveen will decide what will be in his draft report, and then later on in the process we'll see what other political groups come up with. But we have a fairly ambitious timeline. We intend to have a draft report the second week of December, and then we hope to have a deadline for amendments somewhere in January, and then we hope to finish with the negotiating mandate before the elections.
That's indeed very ambitious.
Very ambitious, but let's see if we manage.
Are you looking forward to it, Kerstjan?
I think we have also a challenging ambition, but it's probably just by the end of our mandate we want to be concluding in the council.
Okay, but also on the open finance.
Also on the open finance, yeah, for sure.
It's a really important file. Look, I just received a question for you, and it says that, at least if I read it correctly, it may be too early, but what's your view on the next parliament? And how do you see things taking shape after the elections? Will we see a very different parliament with different dynamics and a different approach to talking to industry stakeholders?
There's a lot of questions. Composition of the parliament, it depends. I mean, there's many analyses being done by organizations like, Politico, but also Europe Elects and EU Matrix. I think a general feeling is that the next parliament will be more polarized and also more fragmented. In the latest polls that I've seen, also the three biggest centrist groups, EPP, SND and Renew, are set to lose some seats, and the smaller groups are set to, expected to increase a bit. But again, that's also what I say about fragmentation. But then at the same time, within some political groups, what you already observe is that there is less group discipline than there used to be. When I started working in the European Parliament, these were ideological blocks, and they voted as such. Now you see, also in my group, but definitely also in groups like the Renew Group, ID Group, in EPP and SND, there's still a bit more discipline. But in general, so you see also dividing lines are also within political groups. But then when it comes to advocacy efforts and will this change with the next parliament? Well, yes, in the sense if the relative importance of the centrist groups decreases, then of course the relative importance of the more, let's say, extreme groups, so let's say outside of the three traditional political groups will increase. So that might change the dynamics. But I must say, I remember back in the days, it's a long time ago, but I think it was banking structural reform, and it ended with a tight vote. And then industry was saying, oh, we forgot to lobby. Actually, it was Vlaams Belang back in the days, one member who it was then, I think, non-attached, not even they didn't have a group. And the whole, and was a tight vote, so it was like 25-25, and the whole proposal was stranded, actually, at committee level. So in that sense, indeed, you might have to lobby broader. People that you would maybe not at first instance approach because you say, they're not like senior MEPs or they don't play a role. Well, they have a vote as well.
Oh yes, that's absolutely so.
And I think, making the connection, first of all, you need to also go to the European Parliament. And let's not forget, lobbying it starts with the Commission, as we said, very early in the process. Then I see that the industry very often comes to the Council, but there is indeed also the Parliament and on an equal footing, so you have to go there, and to all the political parties, and I can tell you also the administrations, also myself, we are doing this, so also the industry should do it. Don't forget, everybody at a certain point can be important in the Parliament, and everybody needs to understand the problems, and it's not enough to go to your regular context, but I think you broadly need to lobby with all of them.
Is that the same for the Commission? Because I mean, if the new Commission comes together and the Parliament is broadly diverse, with regard to your proposals, to your initiatives, do you take that into account? Do you think, well, this will never be passed by are you looking at the way that the Parliament is constituted for your proposals?
Yeah, no, of course, and I think it's true at the more general level, where when someone is proposed as president for the Commission, there's a vote in Parliament. So you need a majority. I mean, we often say the president of the Commission is not elected. That's not really true. She went to Parliament and she got a majority. For that, you need a majority. You need a coalition of parties that are willing, broadly speaking, to support your political priorities. That will continue. Now, because the Parliament, the composition is likely to change a little bit, like Luc explained, we'll need to see where that majority will be this time. Will it be exactly the same as this time? Will it change? That I don't know. But so you have it at the more general level. If you look at the way we are preparing our files on financial services, of course, I mean, there's always technical advice and doing the right thing technically, but you also need to do things that are politically feasible. There's no point in putting proposals on the table if you know that either on the side of the member states or on the side of the Parliament that there are absolutely no majority, or that there's a very strong majority against, then you're wasting your time. So that's why we're at the intersection of economics and politics. So we need to take into account what's feasible and what's not.
Okay. I have a last concluding question to the three of you. How do you see the retail investment strategy file advance under the Belgian presidency? So, who wants to take it first?
In one word, fast.
Fast, yeah, but...
I'll not go into the details of the file, but I mean, it's, again, taking into account that the first half of our presidency will focus on these open trialogues, and we will have to start with that. But once we can restart with the council work, I can tell you that the retail investment strategy is indeed a high priority. I think we have in mind meetings every 3, max 4 weeks, and I can just to give you that's quite a high rhythm. That's fast. So I mean, the intention is at least again to conclude within the council if it's possible. Again, it's a sensitive file, but here I am more optimistic. I think more optimistic than a CMDI or a digital Euro 1. I think, but again, that's council. We'll have to see on the Parliament side, and whether then the Hungarians can take it already up, or it's actually even for the Polish. I don't know. It depends again on when do we have the Parliament, when is it installed, when is the Commission ready. But I mean, at least we will do an effort, and then we'll see when it's being picked up.
But I think for us it's really welcome because, and we were talking about capital markets union, and we were mentioning like listing or insolvency. I think you also need to increase the amount of investment on markets, and you can have several pieces of legislation to shore up the capacity of institutional investors, but if you don't bring retail investors more into investing in markets, I mean, it will always be incomplete. And so, I mean, we need a discussion on that. We need a discussion on how that is done, and that's what will take place now. But we need to make sure we can increase the capacity, but in a way where the retail investors can have simple access and can trust capital markets and can be protected against fraud or whatever.
Yeah, well, certainly the word trust has been pronounced different times, and I suppose it goes both ways. That's absolutely sure. But that doesn't mean that as such, every investment made by a retail investor is a success by definition. There is a risk attached to it as well, and I think we have to be very much aware of that we cannot protect investors against all risk attached to an investment. But if I got it right, the risk file is not a political file, but it's a file that all political parties, Commission and Council want to conclude as early as possible.
Well, in Parliament it's very similar in terms of the timeline. As I understand it, the ambition of the rapporteur, Mrs. Jean Courtin, was from the party of Mr. Macron. She's taking a very French position on the file, and the industry is quite happy about that, I understand. But their intention is to finish the file also, finish, again, negotiating mandate for trilogues before the elections. But I'm not personally involved in it, so I don't know much about the details.
You mentioned it's not a politically sensitive file. I mean, there's also, of course, the national elections at the same day as the European ones. And this is a file which, again, as Tommy well explained, about also retail protection. And in that perspective, I do think that there is an interest by Belgian politicians in the file as well, based on the national elections that will take place. So in that perspective, I do think there is also a political interest, especially also on the Belgian side, because of the national elections. But in general, I don't think this is a file that is politically sensitive in a way on the European level that it might be blocked. And as Tommy explained, it would be good if we can conclude on both sides within the next 6-7 months, so that this file can be picked up as soon as possible once we have all the institutions ready.
Gentlemen, I nearly have to draw this to an end, but before doing so, what would you advise our industry, our financial sector? What can you give us some recommendations? And I keep in mind the word trust, which has already been said by Karel Barth, and some of you mentioned it as well. So what recommendations would you give us? Look, we'll start with you.
I would say it's quite simple. 3 recommendations. Be proactive, build alliances, and keep involved.
Thank you. Tommy?
I think I would keep trust as the first word. I will also recall what we said earlier on coming early and with positions that are well argumented and evidence-based. I think it makes a huge difference for the Commission.
Well, there's nothing much left to add. I think maybe to stress also the timeliness that we discussed, be as fast as possible in reaching out. Focus maybe also on the Belgian perspective more than on the European package, which is of course clearly also very important, but which probably will be dealt with by the colleagues on the European associations. But please make it very clear what are the Belgian problems within certain files, and come to us, I would say all 3 of us, as soon as possible, and I think then you will be heard, and we will do our best. We cannot work magic, but I think we are willing to do quite a lot for the
I think we all understand that you're not the only ones who are going to take a decision. Of course not. After all, we have 27 member states who have to be able to agree on one file, and history has shown that it's not that easy to do it. But in the end, eventually, we will get there one way or another. Well, it leaves me the fact to thank the 3 of you for, first of all, for attending over here and to join the Fincafé. And I would say I'll give you a round of applause, but given that we are the only ones in the room, we have to applaud for ourselves. So I would definitely like to thank the audience for being with us during this presentation. And I wish you all a very nice, not too rainy evening. I wish the same to you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. I think it was a very lively and interesting debate. And let's hope that we can continue, engage on a trustworthy basis with all the 3 of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.